Evening, folks. Gonna try it inside tonight. See if we can do this without waking up the little ones. I'm in our library. You can see all the books back there for the little ones, paintings and stuff. So, um, some of my YouTube videos were shot in here, but they were shot during the daytime when the kids were awake. So we'll see if we can do this without me having to be so soft you can't hear me. I know when I first got started on the YouTube stuff that my voice was so soft you can really it's really hard to hear the sound unless you turn it all the way up. So hopefully I don't have to do that in here, but I can't get too loud because I'm indoors. We'll see what we can do. Today we're going to be talking about fossils, and we're going to be talking still about the biology textbook, and I'm really going to kind of bring this in hard because this is where they introduce the concept pretty thoroughly here. Although they're still talking about the build up to Darwin. They haven't really got to Charles Darwin and his main idea, the popular idea so far. But since it's built on this foundation, I think it's very important that we cover this. So we're gonna cover what the book says real quick, and then I'm gonna get into some quotes from other evolutionary scientists, some other people who are in the biological field, and what they have to say about the fossil record and how it is or is not evidence of evolution. So we're on page 288. It starts off with the heading Theories of Geological Change Set the Stage for Darwin's Theory. And I have to point out again, the way the book is using this word theory, it's fluid again, because these quote unquote theories that they're talking about, they weren't around very long, they were not very well studied, and a lot of what they're calling theory, like we go back to the guys yesterday, Erasmus and Lamarck and some of those guys, and what they're calling theory. Hi, yeah, yeah. Wife's checking to see if the kids are asleep. I think my wife was asleep too. But anyway, what they were calling theory wasn't. It was proven false. Even the evolutionists had discarded them by the time it came about, and so they weren't. They never achieved the state of theory the way that the evolutionists use the word theory when they're talking about the theory of evolution, the way that David Campbell used the word theory. And so it's funny to see them go back and forth, and they're not consistent in their use of it. So theories of geological change set the stage for Darwin's theory, and there's just no consistency here. But let's get on with it. It says the age of the Earth was a key issue in the early debates over evolution. The common view was that the Earth was created about 6,000 years earlier. That's the view I still hold to, being a scientist myself. And so that view is still around. It's still going strong. And that since that time, neither the Earth nor its species that lived on it had changed. Now, you gotta understand that word species has some very mutable definitions to it. When they talk about species, it wasn't a well-defined term back in that time. They've tried to become a lot more precise with it, but of course they still have problems. The word species is a very poorly defined term because there's so many exceptions to it. When you got that many exceptions to it, it's just not a good word. You're gonna have to come up with something a little bit better. But anyway, they say that the species that had lived since that time hadn't really changed. We know that that's in terms of species. As we look at the word today, we know that the species have changed, and a lot of that has been loss of information as the breeding has taken place. So we talked a little bit about that with the dog breeds and stuff. Remember, a purebred is they have less genetic information. They've lost information, and you're going to have a mutt that's going to have a lot more richness in its genetic makeup than a purebred creature. So the species have changed, but anyway, it talks about that the Earth hadn't changed or whatever, and I don't know that that's the case too, because if you're looking at 6,000 years, you're talking Bible, you're talking all of the things in the Bible, and obviously there were some major changes. If you go back to Genesis 3, you talk about the fall of man. Suddenly, man was having to till the earth, and he wasn't getting to just live in the Garden of Eden and pick fruit. Um, you also have the flood, which was catastrophic, a huge catastrophic change in the world. Um, so I don't know that it's fair to say that the people of that time believe that the earth had never changed. But I think what they're talking about more is the gradual change that the evolutionists believe in. So I don't know that the book here is trying to be like deceptive or anything. I think they're just their perspective is a little off. Maybe they don't know the Bible as well as others might. So moving on, French zoologist. I'm going to pronounce it English because again I don't speak French very well, so I apologize for butchering any French names here. But it's Georges, Georges Cuvier, I think is how you say it. Did not think that species could change. However, he did think they could become extinct, an idea considered radical by many of his peers. Um, it says Cuvier had observed that each stratum or rock layer held its own specific type of fossils. So let's talk about the idea of species again. Species becoming extinct, there's neither of the major paradigms care. When you talk about a species going extinct, you're talking about a very small part of a much larger group. So let's say one of Darwin's finch species uh, went extinct. So what? You still have all kinds of finches. Um, I know I show the Al Gore video every year, An Inconvenient Truth, to show what bad science looks like. And he talks about all the species that went extinct. Um, Most of the ones he shows in the film went extinct well before the 1900s. So it's kind of humorous. He has pictures of like the dodo and the Tasmanian devil and stuff like that going extinct. And then he's alleging that that was caused by global warming. The guy's a nutcase, but whatever. The point made is that the species don't matter to evolution. It's literally about the survival of the fittest. So if a species goes out, whatever that they didn't survive, another species is there uh, to have survived and move on, and that's just the way that the environment changes. The other paradigm doesn't even really acknowledge the idea of species because the category is broader. We use the term either Brahman or kind, and if a part of a created kind passes away, it doesn't hurt the overall system. That's just the way that things happen, and so um, the idea that species can go extinct isn't really as big of a deal as much as it's a kind of a nerdy, sciencey um, trivia thing. Now, I'll add a caveat to that. There are some species that are pretty cool, and they're fairly rare. And if those particular species go extinct, I think there is a significant loss. I'm not trying to downplay the loss of something like the giant panda or the polar bear or the blue whale or something along those lines. Um, I think we lose something if we lose something as unique as those creatures. So don't get me wrong there. What I'm saying is that in the systems don't have a preference toward preserving all species. It doesn't matter to preserve all species according to either of those paradigms. So anyway, Cuvier thought they could go extinct, and I guess that was a big deal back then. But uh, he based his thinking on the finding of these fossils in these different layers, and he based his thinking on what became known as the law of superposition. Now, Over on the side of the textbook, it says Earth science. Cuvier based his thinking on what we know as the law of superposition. It states that in a sequence of layered rocks, a given layer was deposited before any layer above it. Generally, that makes sense. I would argue that this is a trend. If we talk about the law of superposition, this should be a trend, because there are cases where things get flipped over. Tectonic activity can flip layers. Other places you can have layers out of order for various reasons. So the law of superposition is about if it's undisturbed by any outside forces, kind of like Newton's laws of motion, unless acted on by an outside force. So that's the law of superposition, and it makes sense. It rains, and then some mud washes in, and then it dries out, and it eventually hardens, forms rock, and then another layer comes in, or whatever. That's what they're trying to say with the law of superposition. And you need to understand, with the law of superposition, it has a limitation to it, in the sense that you're not going to find all of the layers together. You're going to find a few here and a few there, and so within that limited amount of rock layers, the superposition applies. So let's say we go somewhere and there's 5 rock layers. So within those 5 layers, unless we have evidence that something catastrophic happened to flip them, or something in the area indicates that they might have been flipped, then the law of superposition makes sense. We go to another place, maybe there's 10 layers. You go to the Grand Canyon, and there's a lot of layers. Okay, but the law of superposition only applies to those layers at that location. The law of superposition does not apply to all layers all over the earth simultaneously. It cannot, because those are, in a lot of cases, unrelated systems of layers. So if we talk about the layers at the Grand Canyon, they're not going to be affected or related in according to this law of superposition to layers we might find buried in the Sahara Desert over in Africa, or something we might find in the Himalayas. Okay, so please realize the limitation on the law of superposition is only in the given context of a set of layers, wherever you may find them. It cannot apply over multiple sets of layers. All right, so that brings us then to these fossils where we find there, and these fossils are important to the evolutionists because these are one of these pillars, the pillars of evolution, if you will. And I've got an interesting file here. If I can pull it up, I should have pulled it up ahead of whatever, but it's easy to get to. So give me a second. Well, now it's going to take forever to load. So let me read the text while this is loading, and then I'll come back to the information I have. It says, in the textbook, it says fossils are traces of organisms that existed in the past. Cuvier found that the fossils in the deepest layers were quite different from those in the upper layers, which were formed by more recent deposits of sediments. Again, granting the law of superposition in any given set. Cuvier explained his observations in the early 1800s with the theory now known as catastrophism. Okay, catastrophism. Volcanoes, floods, and earthquakes are examples of catastrophic events that were once believed responsible for mass extinction and the formation of all landforms. Let me read that again. Volcanoes, floods, asterisk, exclamation point, and earthquakes are examples of catastrophic events that were once believed responsible for mass extinction and the formation of all landforms. Okay? So catastrophism. And then you have 2 other belief systems, 2 other paradigms here called gradualism and uniformitarianism. Gradualism, canyons carved by rivers show gradual change. Gradualism is the idea that the changes on the earth occurred by small steps over long periods of time. Now, that might seem kind of insignificant right now, but it's really super important that you understand that the people who believe in these small changes over millions of years have problems to deal with. And one of those is called, they even gave a name to it because it was really boggling their minds, the Cambrian explosion. Just suddenly all of these creatures show up in the geological column that they invented, and they can't explain it. They still can't explain it. They tried with things like punctuated equilibrium and stuff like that, but it doesn't. There's no scientific evidence for it. They just came up with it to try to explain something they couldn't explain. And then the last one, uniformitarianism. Rock strata demonstrate that geological. I can't read the word because the page is folded. Guess I should have taken better pictures. Processes, yeah. Rock strata demonstrate that geological processes, which are still occurring today, and over long periods of time, don't change. No, I'm reading this wrong. Rock strata demonstrate that geological processes, which are still occurring today, end up over long periods of time to cause great change. Okay, so you have one where change is rapid, you have one where change is gradual, and then you have one where nothing is the processes aren't changing. There's no changes in the processes at all, but there's this kind of accumulation, and that's the uniformitarianism. And the uniformitarianism is really where we get a lot of our, like the Miller-Urey experiment and some of the other botches in evolution. They think that the Earth has been continuing on the same way forever and ever, and is going to continue that way, and there isn't any significant changes, and so you just have this accumulation of these little micro changes in life or micro changes in geology or whatever. So all right, so I got my file up, and I want to talk about the fossil record. Okay. First of all, it needs to be noted that when we talk about the fossil record, we talk about the geological column, that this geological column only exists in one place in the entire world. That geological column exists only in the biology textbooks. That's the only location. It doesn't exist in the Grand Canyon, it doesn't exist in Africa or Asia or the Antarctica or Europe, anywhere. There's no physical location on Earth where you can go and find the geological column. It is a construct based on thousands of different little micro columns, a few layers here, a few layers there. Sometimes we don't know if they've been flipped or not, and we just have to assume that for the most part that they aren't flipped. And this law of superposition is applied across all of these using something called index fossils. And we're going to talk more about those in just a second. But the geological column that the evolutionists will talk about is only found in textbooks. You can't find it anywhere. So one of the things they talk about with fossils are transitional fossils. We go from this kind of creature to that kind of creature. The really famous ones are humans, which I'll talk about here tonight when I can get to it. But so here's the problem with the transitional fossils, or the fossils that we find, these fossils that we find in the geological column. So-called transitional fossils are based on the circular reasoning that evolution is true, therefore these must be ancestors or offspring of some other fossil. There's actually no observed relationship like the giving of birth that exists. So if we're dealing with observed empirical evidence-based science, there isn't any behind the idea that these fossils are part of the transition, that these fossils gave rise to something else, because we don't actually have an observed relationship between any offspring at all. The fossil that we find, they have never been a creature that reproduced, and so to assert that it was part of some kind of transition or that it was part of some kind of chain is pure speculation, and that's not scientific. Okay, come back to those. I want to deal with some of these other quotes here real quick. Evidence for evolution. The fossil record involves a serious case of circular reasoning. The fossil evidence that life has evolved from simple to complex over these geological periods depends on these specific rocks, these index fossils. And they're assigned to these geological ages based on, the superposition. And then, okay, I found this rock here, and this layer contained this rock, and then, or this fossil, and then I go to this another set over here, and oh, this layer contains that fossil, so those must be the same age. Well, that right there is an assumption, because you have to assume how rapidly the layers formed. You have to assume uniformitarianism. You can't just if you don't assume that, then there's some problems that you've got to deal with. So they assume that, and then they assume, okay, this fossil was found here, so it's the same age as this one over here because they're the same creature. And anyway, the fossils are arranged on the basis of their assumed evolutionary relationships. So what you have is these fossils are assumed to have evolved from simple to complex, and then they are arranged based on what they believed was the evolutionary tree. That okay, this one is older than this one because this one must have evolved into this one or whatever, and it ends up being a circle. And so, if you use these index fossils to date the geological layers, and then you date the geological layers by the fossils that you find in them, it's back and forth. It's back and forth, and you can't base science on circular reasoning like that. There's got to be an independent way to test these hypotheses. Let me read you some quotes here from some of these guys that already knew about the problem. This is back in the 70s. These guys already knew that there was a problem. Gareth Nelson, from Origin and Diversification of Teleostean Fishes in the Annals of New York Academy of Sciences, 1971, page 227. That a known fossil or recent species or higher taxonomic group, however primitive it might appear, is an actual ancestor of some other species or group is an assumption scientifically unjustifiable. For science never can simply assume that which it has the responsibility to demonstrate. And I love that quote. That is a fantastic statement right there, because the evolution is assumed and it's never demonstrated. Anyway, he goes on, it is the burden of each of us to demonstrate the reasonableness of any hypothesis we might care to erect about ancestral conditions, keeping in mind that we have no ancestor alive today, that in all probability such ancestors have been dead for many tens or millions of years, and that even in the fossil record they are not accessible to us. So he's acknowledging that it's an assumption that's made, and he says it's scientifically unjustifiable. Donald Griffin, A Possible Window on the Minds of Animals, American Scientist, Volume 64, from September and October of 1976, page 534. He says, likewise, paleontologists do their best to make sense out of the fossil record and sketch in evolutionary sequences or unfossilized morphology without realistic hope of obtaining specific verification within the foreseeable future. So again, problems. They sketch them in when there's missing pieces. We can talk about the artist sketches that have been done of fossils that have been so misleading to people. They have a jawbone and a finger bone and a couple of other bones, and the artist rendering is a fully rendered, complete humanoid creature. That's misleading, and they put these in the textbooks, and the kids soak it up. Excuse me. All right, one last quote here. James Valentine and Catherine Campbell, Genetic Regulation and the Fossil Record, American Scientist, Volume 63, November, December of 1975. I was almost a year old then. The abrupt appearance of higher taxa in the fossil record has been a perennial puzzle. In other words, they've had to face it over and over and over again. They can't get over it. They've never been able to solve it. If we read the record rather literally, it implies that organisms of new grades of complexity arose and radiated relatively rapidly. Very fast. Okay, and again, that goes back to that Cambrian explosion and other punctuated equilibrium is what they called it. And it's problematic for them. One of the other things that they have to deal with these fossils, and one of the other problems that they just don't have an answer for, has come about in recent years with a number of dinosaurs that have been found that are not fossilized, and they're finding soft tissue in them. And when you get into soft tissue and you talk about how long soft tissue can last, if it's preserved, like a mummy might be preserved, then it's got a few thousand years on it before it'll just break down into its basic amino acids and basic chemicals. But there's no way, it's inconceivable that soft tissue and blood cells and things like DNA can survive millions of years. Well, dinosaurs allegedly died off 65 million years ago, according to the evolutionary paradigm. And these index fossils are supposed to be of creatures that are 65 million years old and older. And that's one of the things that they're justifying this geological column on, to say that the Earth is so old, is these animals died in a specific time category. Well, they couldn't have. If we're digging up soft tissue, can you? And it's fun to kind of think of how much of a pain, how much of a thorn in the side of these guys, these soft tissue samples have become. Mummified dinosaurs. They're not fossilized. They're mummified. They're soft tissue. They're desiccated. They're still got all kinds of muscle tissue, bone tissue, things that just didn't get fossilized or disintegrated yet. It's still around. And of course, there's a lot of scare about a real Jurassic Park. We're going to be taking dino DNA out and making a real Jurassic Park. Well, I'll let somebody else clean up that mess. But the real big issue with these dinosaurs is that they can't be millions of years old. There's no way they can be millions of years old. So one of the big things that really gets into this idea of the fossils and the index of coming from past organisms to today's organisms or whatever is the fascination with mankind's alleged ancestry. And to date, there have been multiple findings of these people, or these almost people, or these monkeys that are starting to become people. And every time there is one, it's a big splash in all of the major news outlets, and then the big magazines like Time magazine and stuff. It's just a huge fanfare about how this is an awesome find. It's the missing link and whatever. And every time it turns out it's just a human, or it's just a monkey, or it's a hoax. You got Nebraska Man, a hoax. Piltdown Man, a hoax. Ochre Man, a single skull cap was found. It's a missing link, a missing link. Ochre Man turned out to be a skull cap of a donkey. Not even a hominid, not even a human shape or whatever. Java Man, he had a tooth, a thigh bone, and a skull cap. The tooth and the leg bone were later determined to be human, and the skull cap was of a giant monkey. So they mixed up their bones. Lucy. The skeleton was put together by non-scientists at the museum. Turned out to be a male and just a monkey. Most people hadn't heard that. Lucy's still touted in a lot of textbooks, but if you actually go look at the science guys, the articles and the journals and the official stuff, it's been recognized that Lucy is a male monkey, and that's it. The list goes on and on. You could just hoax after hoax after hoax. It's almost frustrating in a way, but it's also cool in a way because it makes my job easier. The more hoaxes they try to perpetuate and get caught on, the more evidence we have to show that these guys are just lying to perpetuate the myth of evolution. So really, I'm kind of a mixed view on how to take that, but so anyway, there's a little bit about the fossils. That's kind of the start based on this one page here, building up to Darwin's ideas and stuff. I'll talk more about fossils as we come along to them. There's so much more to cover than I can cover in a single live video at night. I've already run 30 minutes here, and I didn't even intend to do that, but like I said, there's just so much information to cover. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that watch this that say, well, he didn't really say anything, or he just kind of made some assertions or whatever. The book is building into it. I'm building into it. If we want to get into some more specifics down the road, when the book gets into specifics, I'll touch on those specifics. And if anybody wants to comment or ask questions, then we can do that then. Guys, tomorrow is the last day of early voting. We're in I've been kind of paying attention to I'm a nerd. I'm normally wrapped up in my book writing, or I'm wrapped up in doing this, or my job, or my kids, or something along those lines. So I'm not really paying attention to all the nonsense that's going on around me in the world, and the politics are vicious. Oh my goodness, it's bad, and I don't want to delve into it. I'm not going to talk about it, but I am going to encourage you guys to get out and vote, and to get us past this. And please vote. I've been going to work at this new school, and one of the things we emphasize at this school is virtue, honesty, integrity, responsibility, wisdom. Our motto is learn the true and do the good and love the beautiful, and just teaching these kids to be virtuous, good citizens that are capable of carrying on logical, civil discourse. And it is a wonderful place. I can't tell you how much I've worked in there, and the three ladies that I voted for and that I'm encouraging you to vote for support that kind of thinking. They are in favor of school choice, of giving the kids and the parents the choice to go where they know is best for their kids, and I think that's so important. So please get out and vote tomorrow if you have the opportunity. If you're in Clay County, Latanya Peterson and Ashley Gilhausen, Betsy Condon, please vote for them. And if you can't make it out tomorrow, the election is August 28th. Please get out and vote, and just do what you can, because the nonsense has to stop. The nonsense has to stop. But anyway, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for staying with me. I hope you got something out of this video. And like I said, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'm happy to have that civil discourse with you over it. And whatever else you do, keep on learning.